I'm Stuart Neild, and this is Save Danes Moss. Why is it, you may ask, that people want to save Danes Moss in Macclesfield? What's its importance, its relevance in today's troubled times? For starters, let's talk about wildlife. Wildlife such as the Willow Tit, one of the most endangered birds in the UK. The Dingy Skipper Butterfly also lives in Danes Moss, and this is the only known colony in Cheshire East. The small heath butterfly is also here, protected by law, but quickly heading for extinction. The common toad is a priority protected species, which also resides on Danes Moss, along with 3 species of bat. Danes Moss is important to all these creatures. That's why so many people from all walks of life are willing to fight for it. Now we've got Lisa Miller with us. Now Lisa's an ICU nurse. How are you, Lisa?
Hi, I'm good, thanks, Stuart. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Now, you've been a big backer in the Save Danes Moss campaign.
Yeah, huge. All day long, I'll back that campaign.
Now, what has appealed to you about the campaign?
Well, I guess initially once I first heard about Danes Moss having the impending 950 houses going to be built on there and a new road, I thought, the place is like a absolute haven for wildlife. So you start delving in a few more details, and you realise it's an absolute gold mine that should never, ever have been planned to have all this development put on it. So I contacted the Save Danes Moss campaign and just see what I can do to help them as much as I can.
Some people just see Danes Moss as scrubland, that, it's not what it once was, the peat bogs. They're not live anymore, and
no.
It's fine and it can be built on. And one of the things that they say is, if it was so important, why didn't campaigners like yourself campaign earlier before planning permission was given?
Right. Well, there's a few points here. So when Cheshire East first put out the consultation for Reserve Matters applications, it was over Christmas and December 2021. Now, society as a whole, we're all focused on work, ourselves, what we've got to do. We're not focused on sitting, checking on things such as Danes Moss that it isn't going to be developed on. People just would naturally assume a place like that, that's an absolute, carbon sink and all the rest of it, isn't going to be all of a sudden have 950 houses and a link road plonked on there. So they're not going to be sat checking the websites for these such things. And unfortunately, the residents aren't necessarily represented in a council where they're alerted to such things well in advance. These consultations will go out, and really they'll often fly under the radar until one day a developer will turn up on a site and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And that happens all the time up and down the country. So the 21-day consultation that happened over Christmas would have been even more of a distraction for people not even to have noticed. So once it was that it all came to light and more people found out, hence the Save Danes Moss campaign kicked off, and it's grown huge over the past almost 2 years now. That is why, because society can't be sat there checking up on the constant, what feels like being inundated with developments on these precious sites.
What do you think can be done? What do you think can be done to save Danes Moss?
Well, we've got Chris Packham, who's backing the campaign. We've got the Wildlife Trust that are backing the campaign. We've got government plans that outline the 30 by 30 plan, which said 30% of land needs to be protected and restored by 2030. So what what we're doing here. We're at like a crossroads. So on one hand, we've got all these experts telling us what needs to be happening, i.e. the restoration of peatlands, the protection of wildlife, boosting nature. Yet, on the other hand, we've got the total stark opposite that's happening. Development, roads, housing, claiming it's not peatland and all the rest of it. Those are just opinions. The facts are, from experts, that Danes Moss is a huge peatland carbon sink, and it's something that needs to be protected and maintained for our future prosperity.
Now, you're very big with wildlife. You're a volunteer, aren't you, at a local hedgehog rescue?
Yeah, massive. Yeah, I'm a big into conservation and nature. Yeah.
Is there many hedgehogs, do you think, at Danes Moss?
I imagine there is. Yeah, I think the species count was I forget the number now, but it was huge, as well as red listed, all the endangered birds, butterflies, moths, bats, everything on the ecology listing was immense. So yeah, 100%. From a conservation point of view, especially Cheshire Wildlife Trust, they wouldn't put their names to such things if it wasn't worth saving. Well,
thanks a lot for talking to Congleton Radio, Lisa.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me, Stuart.
94% of lowland raised bogs have been lost in the past 100 years in the UK. We, as a country, can be quick to judge other countries for what they do affecting the environment. But we don't always see our own faults, or the faults of those people in charge making the bad decisions. When we do, though, we should speak up. And that's exactly what the people behind Save Danes Moss say they are doing. Now we've got Thomas with us, and Thomas is the chair of Save Danes Moss. How are you, Thomas? Are you okay?
I'm great, thanks, Stuart.
So, how did you first get involved with this project?
Well, it was set up by accident, really. Me and a few friends were really concerned about all the housing developments that we saw across Cheshire. It just felt like the countryside and lots of parts of nature that we really love were disappearing under concrete. And so we decided to monitor the planning applications on the Cheshire East website. And we saw a planning application for Danes Moss to build 950 houses, retail units, supermarket, a big road on this incredible piece of wild land just at the south of Macclesfield. We just couldn't believe it, really, because we knew that land had in the past been a peat bog, and that means that the soil was made of peat, which holds more carbon than anything else on land, more than rainforests, more than trees. And the wildlife on peatlands is incredible as well. So when we saw that there was a planning application for all this development on this incredibly precious wild land, we just couldn't believe it. And we said to each other that we had to do something. So that was with my friend Gordon Richardson. That was back in December 2021, at the end of December 2021. And it's just grown from there, really. We just made contact with other people who we knew cared about nature and knew a bit about the planning system. And it grew organically, I guess, from there.
So you were at ground zero then? You were one of the first people to start this?
Yes. So I was involved from the start, and it's grown incredibly since then. We've been campaigning for just over a year now, and it's really thanks to all of the supporters in the community in Macclesfield, Congleton, and beyond, actually, throughout Cheshire and even beyond Cheshire. It's just grown massively. And like I say, it's thanks to our supporters.
Now, you said it was a peat bog there. I mean, it still is. Is the peat active?
So it's not currently an active peat bog. And what I mean by active peat bog is that the peat is not still building up, because when someone says an active peat bog, what they mean is that the ground is waterlogged, very, very wet, and peat-forming plants are growing and dying there. And when those plants die, they sink into the watery bog and form peat. So that currently is not happening on this part of Danes Moss. However, it is happening on another section of Danes Moss that has been restored by the Cheshire Wildlife Trust and others. And there it is an active bog.
You see, that's the thing. This has been used, I think, as a bit of a stick to beat you with by saying it's not an active bog. But like you say, it could easily be turned, well, not easily, but could be turned into an active bog again.
That's a really good point. So there's no reason to believe that all of Danes Moss could not be returned back to its former state as an active raised bog. And I should maybe just explain what I mean by raised bog, because there's different kinds of peat bogs. Basically, a raised bog is an area of peatland where there's so much water that the mosses and the plants that are holding that water, as they grow, they raise the water table. So that area, that bog, becomes raised and it rises above the surrounding landscape. So, for example, back in the 19th century, there's a record of Danes Moss, and it rose about 10 metres like a giant dome above the surrounding landscape.
I mean, that's amazing, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's incredible. And it's been part of Cheshire's history, Macclesfield history, even before towns and human agriculture existed in the county. It's about just over 6,000 years old. So it formed at the end of the last ice age. The glaciers coming off the Peak District into the Irish Sea scooped out this hollow. And in that hollow, lots of water gathered. Wetland plants grew. As they died, they formed peat. And so that's how Danes Moss formed. And it is now actually the largest raised bog in Cheshire, and it's one of the biggest sites of peat in Cheshire. It's just absolutely massive. To give you an idea of the size of it, so you've got the proposed development site is about 55 hectares or 136 acres, and then you've got the rest of Danes Moss. So to give you an idea of how big Danes Moss is, back in the medieval era, it was about 1,000 acres. Now, what's left of the peat after centuries of peat digging and a landfill being built on Danes Moss, there's about 600 acres left, which is still massive. The proposed development site is 136 acres. And then there is a protected area. That's called a site of special scientific interest. And that area is 126 acres. We think that all of Danes Moss should actually be protected as a triple SI, site of special scientific interest, because of the amount of wildlife that lives there, rare wildlife as well, and the fact that peat is one of the most important things to protect if we want to do something serious about climate change.
Are you a local lad to Macclesfield? Were you born and bred there?
I wasn't born in Macclesfield, but I've lived here since I was 3. I was born abroad, but I've lived in Macclesfield since I've been 3 years old, and I don't actually live on that side of town. I live sort of north. I'm sort of towards Bollington, but it's not really. Sometimes people say, "Well, it's not my area," but actually, if we consider that Danes Moss is one of the biggest peatlands in Cheshire, and that there are wild species living there that don't live in many other parts of Cheshire, we can see that Danes Moss is important to everybody in Cheshire. Actually, it doesn't matter where you live, where you're from.
It's places like this are important to the world. Like you say, it doesn't matter. But what the point I was trying to make, do you have any special childhood memories that you went to visit there?
No. Do you know what? I'll be perfectly honest with you, Stuart. When we first started this campaign, I had never been to Danes Moss. I'd heard of it, but I didn't know how important it was. And it was only through learning about it that I realised that we've got this incredible treasure in Cheshire. One of several peat bogs in Cheshire, actually, that we really need to protect.
I mean, that's the thing. People don't always know what's on their doorstep.
No. I mean, you've got an incredible peat bog just outside Congleton called Brookhouse Moss, and that's an amazing peat bog as well, because that's like a raft. The peat and the moss floats on a lake, and if you walk on Brookhouse Moss, you can see the entire moss moving like a waterbed. It's incredible. I was there the other day, actually. So we've got these incredible mosses in Cheshire, and we just really need to protect them from development and other damage.
I feel sad. I mean, I'm in my 50s now, so I'm seeing what's happened. I'm not like from Congleton. I'm originally from Northwich, but you can see how areas change, and I've seen it over the years how we've lost so much woodland, and it's like it makes me feel sad. At the time, when you're younger, you might not notice so much, but when you're older, you really do. You think, all them woods are gone. All them the little areas. We're not talking about massive woods, but might be the size of half a football field, where wildlife and insects and stuff like that. That's gone.
A lot of unfortunately, in England and in the UK, in the world, actually throughout the world, biodiversity is declining, and it's quite scary, really. Many ecologists and biologists believe that it's a mass extinction, and a large one of many reasons for that is the destruction of habitat. So it's like somebody coming along destroying Congleton or Macclesfield and just expecting all the inhabitants to go and find somewhere else to live. That's what, unfortunately, all this development is doing to wildlife.
Yeah.
And so we're having these massive declines.
I mean, it's definitely a loss of insects, because I know from years ago when you talked in the 1970s, insects were all over. Now, you've still got insects, but you don't hear them as much, you don't see them as much.
Oh, I even when I was growing up in the 90s, I remember you open your bedroom door at night and you'd have loads of moths in, but now it doesn't happen. So these places like Danes Moss that are full of wildlife, we've got to protect them, because they're our hope that nature can recover. I can give you one example of we did a moth night on Danes Moss back at the end of July. Just us and all these moth experts turned up. It was brilliant, and we sat there on Danes Moss with like a light bulb trying to attract moths, and they land on like a white sheet, and you look at all the different species that you've got there, And on this one night, we were only there for about 4 hours. We counted 159 different species of moth, and that was just on one side, on Danes Moss, on the development sites actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you say, there's been a massive decline in insect abundance, but if we protect these wild areas and allow them to expand in places, we do have a hope that they can recover.
I mean, there's so much other wildlife on there. There's bats, isn't there?
Yes, there's 5 species of bats. There is the most endangered bird in the UK, the Willow Tit, which is a beautiful black and white little bird, and it can only live really in wet woodland because it doesn't build nests. It burrows. It excavates, I should say. It excavates little holes in rotting wood and lives there. So if the development goes ahead, most of this wet woodland would be destroyed, and in all likelihood, the willow tit would go extinct locally. So you've got the willow tit, you've got bats, as you mentioned. There's barn owls that live there. There's over 61 protected species live on that development site. You've also got some very rare butterflies, such as the small heath butterfly, and you've also got the Dingy Skipper, it's called, that lives there. And these butterflies are only found at a few other sites in Cheshire. So it just gives you an idea of how important this place is. I think in Cheshire we've got 27 species of butterfly, and on Danes Moss there are 24. So you can see it's an absolute gem.
It doesn't bear thinking about, really, does it? If this is lost, what it will do to the wildlife.
Yeah, it would. Wildlife can't really live in isolated pockets of wilderness. All these wildlife sites, they need to be interconnected. Because wildlife moves around depending on the conditions from year to year, and depending on the pressures that are on wildlife in different sites. So if this development went ahead, you'd have the nature reserve left over with all these species, but it would be isolated from other habitats, because you'd have development to the north of it, development to the west, and the only sort of what they've got to the south of the wildlife reserve is just farmland, which doesn't actually support that many species. You need wildland connecting all these wild habitats.
Well, Thomas, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.
No problem at all. Do you want to hear what people can do to help?
Yes, before you go.
Yeah. So I would say that anybody who wants to stop development on Danes Moss, you should, first of all, write to your MP, even if you're in Congleton. Our MP in Macclesfield supports us, David Rutley. So there's not much point in writing to David Rutley about it, but write to your MP in Congleton. You can donate to our fundraiser, because that will help us to launch a legal challenge if we have to. You can also come to our events, which are on social media. They're advertised on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've got a website as well, www.safedanesmoss.com. So I would say, contact your local councillors as well. This is something that needs to be. Councillors throughout Cheshire East need to understand that this issue goes beyond Macclesfield. So if we can get people throughout Cheshire saying to their councillors that these plans need to be stopped, that would really help the campaign as well.
Well, thanks for talking to us today, Thomas. We really do appreciate it. And we wish you all the best.
Thanks so much, Stuart. Thanks for your time.
Peat locks in carbon for thousands of years. Peat also stores more carbon than trees. Danes moss holds more carbon than 630 football pitches of rainforests. Danes moss is our Amazon rainforest. Now we've got Robert Douglas with us. How are you, Robert? You okay?
Yes, very well indeed, thanks, Stuart.
Now, Save Danes Moss. You've been involved in this for a while, haven't you?
Yes, I have. It was strange. There was a walk going to be done around Danes Moss, and I had heard so much about it. I wanted to learn the full story about it. So I booked myself in February 22 to go on the walk, and it had to be cancelled because it was so wet and miserable. It was too waterlogged for them to do the tour. So it was then revised to July 22, and it fell on the Monday when the temperature was the hottest day of the year at around 40 degrees. And I thought, oh my goodness me, it's all going to get cancelled again. But they didn't want to cancel it twice, so they went ahead. And it was a really, really hot day, but they organised it so well that we spent our time under the tree canopy, and it was nice and cool, and you really got the feel of the benefit of the area for people to spend around there. And we had an excellent guide who told us a lot about Danes Moss and why it must be retained. And I am very disappointed that there is still talk about building these homes and other buildings on this very valuable area of land.
There's been talk, or some people that want to get rid of Danes Moss, where they said that the peat's no longer viable and not doing its job.
Well, I mean, that isn't right. In terms of the fact that it's no longer wet, my understanding is it's no longer capturing carbon, but it is still holding the carbon in the ground. And in fact, I mean, peatlands cover just 3% of the world's surface, but they hold nearly 30% of the soil carbon. And the carbon in Danes Moss it's been retained for thousands of years. I mean, if it was a wet, it would actually capture more carbon, but it's still doing a superb job of keeping the carbon in the ground and thereby helping us fight the climate change battle that we have at the moment.
When you've visited Danes Moss, have you seen many insects and creatures and different types of birds?
Yes, well, we did. I didn't see any birds, but we certainly saw some insects, and they were explaining the different species are there. I mean, that site has the Willow Tit, which is on the red list. It's an endangered species, and in 2021, 3 families of the Willow Tit were recorded on this site. Now, what is being proposed is to put up bird boxes so that they stay in the location. But based on the advice that I've had from the campaigns of Save Danes Moss, this actually will make things worse because the Willow Tits like to make their own nest within the tree that they make themselves. And by putting up bird boxes would encourage great tits and blue tits who could well drive out the Willow Tits out of the area. Obviously there are people there who study it very closely and identify all the different species. They showed us the different types of sphagnum. I have to say, I'm not being a biologist. These things I cannot retain, perhaps as well as perhaps financial numbers.
Do you think losing Danes Moss would be a massive loss?
Oh, it would be a terrible loss to lose Danes Moss. They recorded 61 protected species in that development area. And there's also a real concern that if they do the project of houses on Danes Moss, the fact is that it could end up damaging the area of the special scientific interest, because that is only 70 meters away from the nearest point of this development, so we have to protect that SSSI as well as this area of the of Danes Moss that they're looking at building this property on.
Well, thanks a lot for talking to Congleton Radio today, Robert. We really do appreciate it.
Not at all, Stuart, and thanks for giving me the opportunity for me to say a few words about why we should protect Danes Moss. It would be a very, very sorry state of affairs if the proposed plans go ahead.
And the amount of people telling us about the importance of Save Danes Moss keeps growing. We've got Kay Wesley with us. How are you, Kay?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Stuart?
Not so bad now. You are a big backer of the Save Danes Moss campaign, aren't you?
I certainly am. I think it's absolutely shocking what Cheshire East is planning to do with Danes Moss. And yes, I've supported the campaign. I've signed the petitions. I've done the social media. And I know what a beautiful area it is, but also what a precious area it is for our planet. We have to do something. We have to make better decisions.
Now, have you visited Danes Moss much?
Not recently, but I have in the past, yes. But I do know it's a beautiful area, and it's quite a unique area. And I think what a lot of people don't realise is that a lot of Cheshire used to be like that. I mean, Danes Moss itself used to be much bigger than it is now. I mean, it's now about 300 acres. It used to be, more than 3 times that. But I think, people in Congleton particularly don't realise that Congleton used to have a huge moss area. That we have a place called Moss Road for a reason, and Mossley. And this top end of Congleton was itself a very important moss. And of course, these areas are huge carbon sinks. They absorb so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, far more than the equivalent area of trees would. So they're absolutely vital for our carbon footprint and for our climate emergency, to combat our climate emergency. And I think, working with Cheshire Wildlife Trust on some of the projects that we're doing in Congleton, we know that once the moss dies away, once the moss is gone, then it actually becomes a producer of carbon. So you have to just not sort of allow Danes Moss to continue to exist. You actually have to help it to thrive, which is, I know, what the campaign's all about, and that's what we need to do.
Well, thanks for talking to us today, Kay. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much.
I was speaking to a person who doesn't see Danes Moss as important. Now, that's quite a rarity, because most people do see it as important. The thing is, the ones that don't see it as important, they never want to come onto the radio to have their say. But one dismissive person stood out. She said Save Danes Moss was just misguided people who didn't know what they were really talking about. Personally, I think people like Chris Packham know exactly what they are talking about. So let's hear from him next.
Hello, Chris Packham here. I've got to confess, I've never been to Danes Moss in Macclesfield. I've been to Macclesfield, I haven't been to Danes Moss. But I've been told a bit about it, and I'm interested, because it's got Willow Tit living there. Now, willow tits are one of the fastest declining birds that we have in the UK. They're in a horrible race with turtle doves and lesser spotted woodpeckers to see who can disappear the fastest. And as a consequence, when we've got them, we really need to look after them. And at this point in time, scientists are investing more and more time understanding the ecology and the behaviour of these birds so that we can better implement conservation. So willow tits at Danes Moss is a very, very significant set of feathers in its cap. But it's also got a very important resource. It's got peat. Now, peat is important for lots of different reasons. Firstly, it supports a fantastic and specialist biodiversity of animals that we will only find living on those peatland areas. There aren't many peatlands about. That's the trouble. Large numbers of them have been destroyed. We've dug all the peat out and burned it in the past. We've dug all the peat out and we put it on our gardens in the past, although sadly still in the present. And then we burn it. In parts of the UK we're still burning peat. This is all disastrous because peat is a very important carbon store. The plant material there stays there for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. So if we release that carbon, if we dry it out, if we burn it, if we dig it out and put it on our gardens, we're not helping the climate crisis in any way, shape or form. And yet, given that Danes Moss has willow tits and this very important peat, strangely enough, there's a plan to build houses on it. Well, we need houses. There's an increasing number of us and the way we live is changing all the time. So there's no doubt that we need houses, certainly affordable houses. But we've got to put them in the right place. And I would beg to suggest that there might be another place, in Cheshire, where we could put these houses. So would you look up Save Danes Moss? And would you sign their petition? And would you think about writing to the Housing Minister, Michael Gove, who was Environment Minister and does have an interest in the environment, and saying to him very politely, look, can we think again about this? Because this is a really important place. That would be great. At this time, we have to fight for every last scrap that we've got. And Danes Moss, I think, is an important scrap and well worth a fight.
And it isn't just Chris Packham who has the right credentials to question things. Now, we've got Gordon with us, and Gordon is one of the founders, one of the first members of the Save Danes Moss group. How are you, Gordon? You okay?
Very well, thank you.
Now, you really are a core member of the group, aren't you?
Well, I'm one of the founders, and my background is in environmental advisory work, so I bring some of the technical skills to the group.
So, why have you got involved with this?
Well, Danes Moss is a really valuable, much-loved piece of land. It has a huge wildlife element to it, but it's really a very important piece of open land on the southern edge of Macclesfield. It's used enormously by the surrounding communities, not just from the Moss estate, but from as far away as the Western estate, which is probably about a mile away. So it's used by lots and lots of people. And the thing that really struck me was when I looked at the planning application, the outline planning application, it had a document called an environmental statement with it. Now, I'm retired now, but before I retired, I'd spent 38 years writing environmental statements and undertaking environmental impact assessments, and I could not believe how bad the environmental impact assessment was that went alongside the planning application. So, to cut a long story short, a few of us got together, talked about it, put some objections in, and the group grew and grew and grew. And the more it grew, the more people who used the site got involved, and the more people who valued the site, because during COVID it was an absolute godsend. It was the only piece of open land on the southern edge of Macclesfield that people could use. So really, it was partly because the site is absolutely fantastic, but the other thing is the planning application was absolutely awful.
Now, it's obviously very dear to your heart. Have you known about this place for years?
Yeah, I've lived in Macclesfield for 17 years, I think 17 or 18 years. I've known of this area, the Danes Moss area, virtually since day one, because there's a superb nature reserve on the edge of the site. And when I got a dog about 5 years ago, it was a great place to go walking the dog. So yeah, I've known it for a long, long while, and valued it.
I mean, like you said, you were involved with these type of planning things. You did things like that, and there's no way that this would have passed under you.
Well, there's no way any of my team would have put out a document quite as bad as this one. I mean, to give you an example, when you set the scope of these studies, the issues that you're going to look at, you have to think about things like climate change, and they had explicitly said they would not look at climate change. Well, if you don't look at climate change, which is incidentally one of the most severe problems facing society at the moment, but if you don't look at climate change, you don't have to think about the peat that's under the ground, because the peat locks up something like about 220,000 tons of carbon dioxide. So it's a huge carbon store, and they just want to dig it up or destroy it. You know, it's just wrong.
So, so you think if the peat was dug up, that would have massive implications to the environment?
Yeah, when peat dries out, it oxidizes. And when it oxidizes, it emits carbon dioxide and methane, both of which are very powerful greenhouse gases. And you don't even have to dig it up, you just have to dry it. So if you lower the water table, and it's almost at the surface over most of the site, you obviously have to dry out the peat. As it dries out, it emits greenhouse gases. So, you know, you can't build on wet peat, so they would have to do something with it. And in fact, what they have proposed is to drill down and pour dried cement and sand into it. And the groundwater then turns that cement and sand and peat into concrete. But that doesn't help in the slightest, because all the peat around it will just subside. So you'll end up with houses that are subject to subsidence, roads that are subject to subsidence. And then, in fact, that method that they're proposing has never actually been used in this country. So it's completely guesswork from day one.
Now, there's obviously a lot of moss there, and moss really soaks up water. I don't think some people realise how much good work it does.
That's right. Yeah.
So do you think, you know, obviously, if that moss is all going to be ripped up, there's going to be more flooding in the area?
Well, that's the other thing.
Because moss is like it's like a sponge, how it soaks everything up.
Well, you wouldn't, for a project like this that covers nearly 140 acres, you would expect the environmental impact assessment to look at groundwater, not just how deep it is, but which way it's moving and where it's flowing, how fast it's flowing. And there's absolutely none of that in the planning application. So, you know, we talk about flooding, it's almost a given, really.
You must have seen some rare birds or bats or insects when you've been there.
Yeah. We one of the things that the planning application said was that there was almost no wildlife on the site. I think they mentioned one species of insect and the one bird that's known to be breeding on the site, which is the willow tit. Now, the willow tit just happens to be Britain's most vulnerable and threatened songbird. There are only about 3,000 pairs left in the whole country, and 3 of those 3,000 pairs nest on Danes moss. But they decided not to study those because it was too small a population to look at, which is absolutely nonsense. So they've undertaken, or they, for the outline permission, they didn't look at ecology. And we've had an ecologist who's one of our core team go out there since probably February last year. So he's been recording for almost a year now, and he's found something like 800 species of birds, insects, and mammal on site. And of those 800, 61 are protected under English law. So to say that the site's not got any wildlife value is just ridiculous.
Where do you see this going? Do you think it's a fight that you can win?
We think so. I don't think it will be the outright win that we want. We just want them to go away. We've developed a vision for the site and how it can be developed as a kind of nature park for the people of Macclesfield. That's getting a lot of attention. We've just put in a request to Natural England, who are a government agency that is supposed to look after wildlife in this country, to have it classified as a site of special scientific interest, which would give it legal protection. We have had a meeting with Barrett's, who have bought more or less 50% of the site, and they've been really quite open. They at least want to talk to us, which is a great deal more than the council does. What the council wants to do with its half of the land is anybody's guess. But we're not in this to lose it. We only want to preserve the site and preserve it for the people of Macclesfield.
It must take quite a bit of money, though, to fight this fight.
Well, we're all contributing our time because that's what we do. You know, nobody's paying us to do this. We've raised around about £25,000 for legal fees, because we're quite confident at some stage we're going to end up in court. Not because we've broken the law, but because if it's permitted, there are so many holes in the planning application that we will need to instigate a judicial review, and judicial reviews cost around about £40,000 to £60,000 usually. So, you know, we're about halfway towards funding one of those. If they refuse it, it's just possible that Barrett's or even Engine of the North, which is part of the council, can appeal against the decision. And if they do appeal, we will take part in that, which means we'll have to have a barrister. So we've got a fund of about £25,000 for legal purposes, and we're ready to use it.
Well, thanks for talking to us today, Gordon. We appreciate your time and your efforts.
Thank you very much.
We've time for two final voices, hoping that together the chorus of Save Danes Moss can be heard far and wide. We've got Rob Morton with us. How are you, Rob? You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Now, you've been a big backer of Save Danes Moss, haven't you?
Yeah, I find it a bit bizarre. There's loads and loads of places where Cheshire's can build houses. There's been so much controversy regarding this site. I can't believe they're actually digging their heels in and still trying to carry on building on this site when there's so much controversy around it.
Now, just before we come on air, you were saying how you enjoy wildlife and green spaces.
Yeah, I'm all for protecting wildlife. If we don't protect them, they'll just disappear.
Thanks for talking to us, Rob. And we've got Susie Firkin with us. How are you, Susie? Are you okay?
I'm very well, thank you, Stuart. How are you?
Not so bad. Now, you have another person backing the Save Danes Moss campaign.
Indeed, I am. Yes, I feel quite frustrated. Really, there's an area on our doorstep with the characteristics that Danes Moss has got is under threat, and really believe that it's something that we need to save.
Now, it is seen, and everyone I talk to seems to think it's a very unique area.
Well, it is, and at the moment, when we're all focused on trying to achieve net zero as a country, and we're looking to combat the climate emergency and to improve biodiversity in this country and all countries around the world, that a habitat like Danes Moss, which is actually a carbon sink because of its underlying peat, is actually a threat, and it should be an area that we should be preserving. helping to preserve the carbon that is stored within it, and that could support the holding much more carbon in the future if the area was actually renovated and brought back to sort of peat moss type area. So I think there's a lot of potential there for the future, which is been ignored if it's treated as just another development site.
Now, you've got your own wood. I know it's not in this area, but you have your own wood that you go and visit. You know a bit about things like this, don't you?
Well, thank you for remembering my wood.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And I do have a professional interest in this as well, in as much as, a lot of my day job is spent working in and around the sustainability topics. And with regard to, what could happen at Danes Moss, I think it was really time for a review, because since the original ideas of developing on this site and the proposals for development were put in, a huge amount has changed from a legislative point of view and from our understanding of what we need to do for the future. So there's lots of regulations and policy that exist now that didn't exist back then. So we have a new environment bill. We have a biodiversity net gain bill. We have a number of different regulations that have been brought into force by this government, and many more that will be brought into force over the next few years, which really make a nonsense out of developing Danes Moss, which should be protected for the future.
So these new bills that have come in could be a real game changer.
Well, they ought to be a real game changer, yes. They really ought to be. And there's recently been a very influential report produced. It's known as Mission Zero. It was produced by an independent review of whether or not the government in charge of this country are making fast enough progress towards net zero, and for us to be able to stay within the 1.5 degree temperature change that we need to do to protect our planet. And this review was really absolutely definitive in terms of we must do more to protect our environment. We must make changes within our planning process so that areas like Danes Moss are protected, and that there really needs to be much greater clarity and commitment and certainty all the way from the top, from national government down to local government. And as we know, Cheshire East have a very specific involvement in Danes Moss, right down to us as individual homeowners and landowners. So all of that pressure is there, and all of the words are there, and then on the ground we see not enough action is the truth of the matter, Stuart. So I'm really hoping that there is the potential to review what might happen at Danes Moss, and if enough people stand up to what is happening and make it known how important it is that we do something different, hopefully someone will listen.
Well, thanks a lot for talking to us today, Susie.
It's a pleasure, Stuart, as always.
Can Danes Moss be saved? At the moment, only time will tell. Should it be saved? That's something you yourself can answer. And maybe you can even get involved in.